I genuinely believe that actually people are bigging this up for a very large binary decision. I think they're going to be incredibly disappointed. I think there is a very high chance still, despite all the shenanigans last night, and it was late last night, trust me, and again this morning, because there's a pre-meeting this morning with all the ministers at one of the big swanky hotels, the kind of place that you inhabit, Jeffrey, as well, where they're going to try and thrash out a deal. But the point is, there are so many nuances and different levels you could be picking a production cut from, and whose numbers you are using as well, that actually they could all be satiated in some form of a deal, but the market will be left unsatiated. Let me give you an example as well. When do you take the production freeze or cut from, depending if you're talking about Iran or Iraq? Do you take it from now, or do you take it from a February level? Do you take it from a point where Iran is allowed to get to circa 4 million barrels a day, which is roughly where they were before the start of sanctions a decade ago? And then whose numbers do you use as well? There's all kinds of use in the terminology about secondary sources. Well, this is basically an argument about whether you believe the governments themselves and what they're producing, or you believe international secondary sources and different agencies who are making that call. Because if you take a government call which is higher, then of course you're cutting from a higher base, and potentially, if that's not an accurate figure, you're not really cutting at all. So all these little nuances. Do we get quotas? Do we find out what the quotas are as well? So many issues which I think would allow the cartel to have almost a fudge. The problem is with a fudge is, would the market take it on its merits, or would actually the market say, do you know what, I'm not sure about this one, I'm going to sell aggressively? There's lots of wonderful calls out there all of a sudden. I've seen $20 odd a barrel, I've seen $30 odd a barrel. Let's leave it a little bit and be a bit cautious on those calls, bearing in mind the calls on Brexit and the calls on Trump this year and what markets would do. Well, they've been completely and utterly wrong, and I think we could see a little bit of that as well, because it is about positioning, it's about other factors as well. You'd have seen a piece I sent to the newsroom from Carl Weinberg of HFE earlier and said it's nothing to do with supply and demand, it's all about US interest rates. And there is a degree of truth about that being put into the mix. So I think we need to wait and see a little bit. But I'll tell you one thing that is amazing. We didn't get a deal in Doha in April. We did get a deal, a firm deal, that took us up to $53 a barrel, apparently, in Algiers. From Algiers, September, to now, literally, what are we, 3, 4, 5 hours before the actual meeting proper, we're still talking, we're still potentially talking about fudge. Now, that is not great cohesion, and it does not bode well for the future, for relations between Tehran and Riyadh and Baghdad as well, and the rest as well. So I think it's the same old OPEC in many ways. I know it's the most anticipated in many, many years, but I see very, very similar patterns going through. Let me just get you a little bit of tape as well. Al-Mazroui, he is a GCC minister, he's the minister of the UAE, he's an ally perhaps of what the Saudis are saying. He talked to me last night about the barriers to getting a deal done. Let's listen to him. Right, my understanding is we don't have that tape for you at the moment, but let me hand it back to you guys in the studio.
Steve, let's just explore that concept. If there is a deal cobbled together at the last minute today, that's where the market pricing seems to be in the final hours as we count down to the OPEC meeting. Would it matter enormously to the Saudis at this point if they did agree to some of the demands and cut production? Because you've had 6 months effectively where the market has traded fairly erratically from high points to low points. We're only looking at the potential for another 6-month deal. So could the Saudis just wear a production cut for the next few months?
Yeah, I think you make a very interesting point, because the prevarication, Karen, has taken absolutely for ages and taken a good 6 months out of the market. You're right. I mean, we've been building up, and in the meantime, supply and demand apparently has been correcting itself to get more to a balance. This is what a lot of the analysts have been saying. It's what Al-Mazroui said to me yesterday, and I'd love to have shared with you that tape as well about the natural balancing of the market. But I think we might have to wait for that one as well. But the point being is, Saudi did make these comments, which is almost a fallback position, that there will be balance in the second half of the year 2017. IEA and others are talking about demand growing by perhaps as much as 1.5 million barrels a day, which would perhaps knock out a large amount of the surplus in the market, perhaps, as Goldman suggested, maybe even take us to surplus, to a deficit. My only caveat is that it is the corroder situation, i.e. so many times I've heard somebody saying, don't worry, it's going to correct itself in 6 months. We will get our 2% inflation by the end of fiscal year 2016, etc., etc. And I just haven't seen that come through. We were supposed to have balance in the market now. That's what they told me now, and now we're being told it's another year. So I think there are real dangers on relying on those longer term forecasts to balance out the market, and I think that is what many of the oil men are very scared about.